Welcome, fellow historians, to a journey beyond the known chronicles of the Imperium. We often speak of Paul Atreides, the rise of the God Emperor, and the scattering. But what of the ages that came before? What secrets lie buried beneath the sands of Arrakis, lost to time and the shifting dunes? From the ancient wars against the thinking machines to the whispers of the Zensuni wanderers who first sought refuge on this desert planet, a vast, untold history awaits. These are not just stories. They are the foundations upon which the universe of Dune was built. Join me as we excavate the forgotten lore, decipher the cryptic symbols, and piece together the epic sagas that shaped humanity's destiny among the stars. Subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss our first expedition into the deep past. The spice isn't the only treasure Arrakis holds.
Across the deserts of time, truth is buried beneath the sands. You're watching Third Age Historian, where the forgotten lore of Dune is revealed.
They said the Jihad freed humanity from its metal gods, that the last machine had been burned, its memory buried in the sands of time. But the truth was far darker, for in destroying the machines, mankind learned to become one. Minds were trained to think without mercy. Logic became sacred, calculation divine, and from the ashes of silicon, a new order arose. The Mentats, living computers, worshippers of pure reason. They did not pray to gods. They prayed to thought itself. But when logic becomes faith, what happens to the soul? In the aftermath of the Butlerian Jihad, silence ruled the stars. The great machine intelligences were gone. Their circuits turned to dust. Their cities left hollow and cold. Humanity had won its freedom, but not its peace, for in destroying their creations, men had also destroyed their certainty. The machines had once thought for them, reasoned for them, judged for them. Without them, civilization trembled on the edge of madness. And so, the survivors of the Jihad sought a new order, not a steel and code, but a flesh and mind. They turned inward. They sought to rebuild the machine within the human soul. From this yearning came the great schools, the Bene Gesserit, the Suk doctors, and among them, the most feared and revered of all, the Mentats, men and women remade into living computers, their minds trained to replace the forbidden engines of thought. But beneath this triumph of reason lay a question no law could answer. Had humanity truly escaped the tyranny of the machine, or learned to worship a quieter one? When the last thinking machine fell, the heavens were said to have gone quiet. No hum of data, no voice of command, only silence, vast and unbroken. It was the silence of a species forced to think again. The Butlerian Jihad had ended in victory, but also in fear. Entire civilizations had been built on dependence, on engines that calculated, predicted, and ruled. To destroy them was to shatter the rhythm of existence itself. Humanity emerged from the war both free and crippled. The victors decreed the Orange Catholic Commandments. Thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind. These words were more than law. They were scripture, a covenant born from trauma. In temples of ruin and data ash, priests and philosophers debated the same haunting question. If machines could no longer think for us, who will? And from that fear, the great schools began to rise. The Bene Gesserit sought mastery of the body and the soul. The Spacing Guild turned to the infinite depths of spice and probability. But one order turned inward to logic itself. They studied mathematics as if it were scripture. Memorization became meditation. Precision became prayer. To think without error, that was salvation. To see the pattern in chaos, that was grace. The earliest Mentats were not called by that name. They were scholars, record keepers, remnants of forgotten academies. They gathered in shadowed halls, decoding what the Jihad had forbidden. They studied the lost principles of computation, not through machines, but through the discipline of the mind. They trained their memories until a single number could unfold into entire histories. They learned to visualize systems as symphonies of cause and effect. Where once circuits had processed data, now human neurons bore the weight of empire. In this rebirth of reason, humanity found both redemption and arrogance. The Mentats promised a world safe from the tyranny of the machine. Yet in secret, they envied the cold perfection they had destroyed. Some whispered that in the dark of their calculations, they could hear the echo of the old intelligences, not in code, but in thought. For perhaps, in seeking to replace the machine, they had merely invited it back, through the corridors of a human mind. And from that silence, a new power began to awaken. The Mentats had saved civilization from collapse. They brought order where there had been chaos, reason where there had been fear. In the centuries after the Jihad, every noble house sought them, living engines who could see patterns beyond comprehension, who could predict markets, wars, and the hidden motives of men. They became the backbone of the new Imperium, the silent architects of stability. Yet with each generation, the line between logic and faith began to blur. To think perfectly was to be pure, to doubt was to err. And so logic, once a tool, became doctrine, a religion without a god, yet no less absolute. The Mentats believed that truth could be found only through reason. That emotion was distortion. That mercy clouded clarity. In their pursuit of perfect calculation, they stripped the soul from thought, and in doing so, they recreated the cold precision of the very machines they had sworn to replace. Beneath the banners of noble houses, Mentats became indispensable and dangerous. Some served with honor, like Thufir, the master of assassins, whose loyalty to House Atreides was forged in duty and intellect. Others turned to cruelty, like Piter de Vries, the twisted creation of the Bene Tleilax, who proved that even logic can be corrupted by desire. Both were reflections of the same paradox, that the human mind, when trained to think like a machine, cannot escape the hunger for control. The Mentats claimed to serve truth, but truth itself became malleable, a tool to justify any end. When calculations determined morality, atrocities became equations. Empires were built on probabilities. Lives were measured in percentages of efficiency. The Imperium learned to worship these human machines, for they offered certainty in an uncertain universe. But certainty is a quiet kind of tyranny. The Mentats' word could doom a planet. A single flawed assumption could ignite a war, and still they believed themselves pure. For how could logic be evil when it had saved mankind from chaos? Yet beneath this order, a darker design was hidden. By exalting reason above all else, humanity had built a new form of dependence, not on circuits, but on minds that no one could question. The Mentats became indispensable, and thus unchallenged. And with unchallenged logic comes the oldest illusion of all, the belief that thought itself is infallible. Some Mentats began to whisper that the Jihad had not destroyed the machine, only transfigured it. That the new god of man was not metal, but mathematics. And in the halls of the Mentat schools, the phrase was spoken like a prayer. The mind commands and the universe obeys. But the universe does not obey. It resists. It rebels. It bleeds through the cracks of logic, reminding man that no equation can contain the chaos of the soul. And in that dissonance between thought and feeling, order and freedom, the next age of the Imperium will be born. Because when logic becomes law, mercy becomes obsolete. And when obedience replaces understanding, a new kind of machine begins to rise, not made of metal, but of men. The Mentats were born from fear, but also from faith. Faith in the human mind. They believed that logic could purify the soul, that thought alone could build a just order. But Herbert understood something far more dangerous. When humanity worships its own reason, it no longer needs gods. It becomes one. The Jihad had destroyed the machines, yet their spirit endured, reborn in the calculus of men. Humanity did not end the age of automation. It internalized it. The Mentat was not the death of the machine. It was a machine made flesh. And in their rise, Herbert saw the reflection of our own world, a civilization that measures truth by data and morality by efficiency. He was not predicting a future of metal, but a present of systems. Systems of control, systems that think for us, decide for us, even dream for us. To Herbert, the real threat was never computer. It was the idea of computation. The belief that everything, even a human heart, can be calculated, optimized, understood. But what cannot be calculated is the soul. The Mentat path demanded obedience to logic, yet the human spirit craves contradiction. We are drawn to mystery, to love, to faith, the unquantifiable. And so the Mentats' perfection became their cage. They could predict the movements of stars, yet not the beating of a single heart. They could weigh the worth of empires, but never the value of mercy. In the quiet chambers of their discipline, they replaced prayer with probability. Their mantras were algorithms. Their sanctuaries, data in flesh. But Herbert asks us, what happens when logic itself becomes divine? When the mind ceases to serve humanity, and humanity begins to serve the mind? The Mentats were not villains. They were humanity's reflection. Our eternal hunger to master the unknown, to turn chaos into pattern. But in every pattern, something sacred is lost. That is the tragedy of the Mentats. They saved mankind from the tyranny of the machine, only to teach it a quieter obedience. And yet, within that obedience, the seeds of rebellion still lived. Because even in the most ordered mind, the heart still whispers. The irrational still dreams. The human still defies. This is the paradox Herbert left for us, that salvation and damnation often share the same design. The Mentats were proof that humanity cannot escape what it creates. For every time we destroy our gods, we build them again in our own image. Whether metal or flesh or data, the machine endures. And perhaps that is the hidden prophecy of Dune, that the ultimate machine was never silicon or circuitry, but consciousness itself. A system so vast, so intricate, so convinced of its own logic, that it forgot what it was made to serve. And in that forgetting, the Imperium was born. In the end, the Mentats were not heroes or villains. They were mirrors, reflections of what humanity becomes when it mistakes reason for truth. They prove that the mind, left unguarded by compassion, can become as ruthless as any machine, and that the line between intelligence and worship is thinner than we dare admit. The Mentats rose to replace the machines, but in their rise, they taught us something eternal, that every age creates its own gods. Some are carved from metal, some from faith, and some from the circuitry of a human brain. The Butlerian Jihad may have ended the reign of the thinking machines, but the greater war, the war within the human mind, has never ceased. For as long as we seek perfection, the machine will live on within us. And so we end where we began, in silence, the hum of data, replaced by the whisper of thought. The worship of gods has been replaced by the worship of logic. The Mentats were humanity's triumph, and it's a quiet confession. We did not destroy the machine. We became it. Subscribe, and remember, history always repeats, even in the Imperium.